She was already walking when she heard it. Not the music. Not the murmur of 300 guests pressing into polished wooden pews. Not the rustle of white roses or the quiet weeping of someone's grandmother near the back. She heard his laugh. That specific laugh, low, loose, careless. The one Daniel only used when he thought no one important was listening. Emily Carter stopped mid-step in the side corridor of St. Augustine's Chapel, her bouquet of ivory peonies clutched against her chest, her cathedral veil trailing behind her like a ghost. Her maid of honor, Grace, had gone ahead to signal the organist. Her father was waiting at the top of the aisle. The flower girls had already scattered petals across the marble floor. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. And then she heard her own name come through that half-open door. She didn't mean to stop. She didn't mean to press her back against the cold stone wall and hold her breath. But the human heart does strange things when it senses danger before the mind can name it. And something in Emily's chest, something old and quiet and deeply knowing, went absolutely still. Inside the room, Daniel was talking to his best man, Marcus. "Relax," Daniel said, and she could hear the grin in his voice. 20 more minutes and it's done." Marcus said something she couldn't make out. "No, I'm serious." She has no idea. A pause. The sound of a jacket being adjusted. She never does. Emily's fingers tightened around her bouquet. "You actually feel nothing?" Marcus asked, his voice lower now, cautious. "I didn't say nothing." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I care about her." Emily's look, she's great. She's stable. She's successful. My parents love her. Marrying her makes sense. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Sense. "But you don't love her," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't answer immediately. And in that silence, that terrible stretching silence, Emily felt the first crack run through the foundation of everything she'd built over 6 years. "Not the way she thinks," he finally said. "Not the way she deserves. But she doesn't need to know that." Emily pressed her hand over her mouth. "Daniel, I'm not ending my career for a feeling, Marcus. Sophia understands that. Emily doesn't need to." He said it the way someone discusses a business strategy. Measured. Unbothered. Final. "Sophia." The name hit Emily like cold water. "It's still going on?" Marcus's voice had dropped even lower. "You said you ended it." "I said what I needed to say." A short laugh. "Come on. People do this all the time. Emily gets the life she wants. I get stability. Everyone wins." Emily didn't hear the rest. Because the blood had drained from her face. Because her legs had stopped working the way legs are supposed to. Because 6 years of long-distance calls at midnight, of eating rice and beans when they were both broke, of turning down a job in London because Daniel asked her to stay, of defending him to her mother who always said something was off. 6 years had just been reframed in a single sentence. She gets the life she wants. I get stability. Everyone wins. She walked back to the bridal suite on autopilot. She doesn't remember opening the door. She doesn't remember sitting down. What she remembers is Grace's face. That exact moment when her maid of honor turned and saw her and went pale. "Eminencia, what happened?" Emily opened her mouth and burst into tears. Not the soft, grateful kind she'd imagined crying at the altar. These were ugly, gasping, silent sobs that shook her whole body. Grace was beside her in seconds, arms wrapped around her shoulders, and Emily just cried. Cried in a way she hadn't since her grandmother's funeral. Cried the way you only cry when something dies. Because something had died. The man she thought she knew. The life she thought she was walking into. The version of herself who believed, completely and without question, that she was loved. Grace didn't push for an explanation. She just held on. When Emily could finally speak, it came out in pieces. The hallway. The laugh. The words. "Sophia." Grace went very quiet. Then slowly, a cold and focused fury moved into her eyes. "Tell me what you want to do," she said. Before Emily could answer, the door opened. Her father, Thomas Carter, 61 years old, ex-military, a man who had cried exactly twice in Emily's memory, stepped inside. He took one look at his daughter's face and his own crumpled. "Baby," he said. "What's wrong?" "I can't marry him, Dad." Thomas crossed the room and crouched in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "Then we don't." I'll go out there right now and... No. Emily looked up. Something had shifted behind her eyes. The tears were still there, but underneath them, something harder, something quiet and decided. No, I'm not leaving. I'm not running. Thomas studied her face. Emily, I'm going to finish it, she said. On my terms. Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once slowly, the way he used to nod before she walked into a difficult exam or a hard conversation. I trust you. I'm here. Go. She stood up, went to the mirror, looked at herself, at the dress, the veil, the artfully pinned hair, the blush on her cheeks that was already streaked with mascara. She took a slow breath. Then she reached for a tissue, cleaned her face with careful, deliberate strokes, and touched up her makeup with hands that had almost stopped shaking. Then she picked up her bouquet, and she walked back out into that corridor. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one come out every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's about to happen next. The organ began. 300 people rose to their feet. The doors at the back of the chapel swung open, and the golden afternoon light poured in around Emily Carter as she appeared at the top of the aisle, and the collective breath of the room went out all at once. Because she was breathtaking. Ivory satin, cathedral veil, peonies at her chest, posture straight as a column. Her father's arm was steady under hers. His jaw was set. She walked slowly the way she had practiced. Her eyes moved over the faces lining the pews, her aunts dabbing their eyes, her college friends grinning and nudging each other, Daniel's corporate colleagues in the back rows, his mother in the front with a handkerchief already pressed to her lips. And then Daniel. He was watching her walk toward him with that smile she had once described to Grace as the smile that made her feel like the only person in any room. Confident, warm, a little proud. He had no idea. Emily reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Daniel's and stepped back. Daniel squeezed her fingers and leaned slightly forward. You look incredible, he whispered. She smiled and said nothing. The officiant began. The words moved over Emily's head like weather. She heard them, but they didn't land. She was thinking clearly, with a focus so sharp it almost felt foreign. She was listening for her cue. She was waiting for the moment the officiant turned to her and said the words. And now the couple will exchange personal vows. Daniel turned to face her fully and reached into his jacket for a folded piece of paper. He cleared his throat. The chapel was completely silent. Emily. His voice was warm and steady. I have been trying to write these vows for months, and every time I tried to capture what you mean to me, words felt too small. He paused for effect and several guests smiled. You are the most patient, brilliant, grounded person I have ever known. You have made me better. You have made me believe in the kind of love that lasts. His voice dropped slightly, earnest now, and Emily watched the faces in the pews, watched people nod, watched his mother press the handkerchief harder against her lips. I promise to choose you every day, to protect what we are, to be the man you deserve. Several people wiped their eyes. Emily stood absolutely still. The officiant smiled gently at her. Emily. She reached into the small fold of her bouquet wrap, where Grace had tucked it 10 minutes ago per instruction, and withdrew a folded piece of paper. She looked at it. Then she looked up at the room. These are not the vows I planned, she said. Her voice was clear and calm and carried to the very back of the chapel without effort. A few guests exchanged glances. Someone gave a small, uncertain laugh, assuming this was a charming bit of preamble. Daniel's smile flickered, just slightly, just for a half second, and then reset. 30 minutes ago, Emily continued, I was standing in the corridor outside the groom's suite. The smile disappeared. I wasn't trying to listen. I was looking for my grandmother's bracelet, which I'd left at the other end of the hall. She paused. But I heard my name, and I stopped. The chapel had gone the kind of quiet that has weight to it, the kind where even the children stop fidgeting. Daniel's face had gone the color of chalk. I heard the man standing next to me tell his best man that he doesn't love me, not the way I think. She unfolded the paper. That marrying me was the smart move, that I was stable, successful, that his family likes me. Her voice didn't waver. He used the word sense. Marrying me makes sense. A sharp inhale ran through the congregation like a wave. Daniel stepped forward. "Emily." "I also heard a name," she said. "Sophia." The wave became a ripple of murmurs. Daniel's mother had gone rigid. Marcus, standing just behind Daniel, had dropped his head. "I want everyone here, everyone who traveled for this, everyone who bought gifts and booked hotels and got dressed up this morning, to know what I know." She looked down at the paper. "Because you all deserve the truth too." She began to read. She had written down every word she could remember from that corridor, and she read them now, quietly and with precision, without drama, without theatrics, which somehow made it worse. The composed delivery of something devastating. A few guests covered their mouths. One of Daniel's aunts stood up slightly, then sat back down. His father had turned to stone in the front pew. When she finished reading, she folded the paper once. "I also want to show you something." Grace appeared from the side aisle, composed, deliberate, and handed Emily a phone. Emily turned the screen briefly toward the congregation. Screenshots. Messages. Time-stamped. The kind of evidence that doesn't lie. She didn't read them aloud. She didn't need to. "Daniel." She turned to him fully for the first time since she'd started speaking. He was staring at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Trapped, frantic, reaching for something to say and finding nothing. "I gave you 6 years. I gave you the London job. I gave you Sunday mornings and hard seasons and every version of myself I had at 23, 25, 27, 29. She felt the tears then, the real ones, and she let them come. "I would have given you the rest." The chapel was utterly silent. "The saddest part," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word, "is not losing you. I thought it would be. I thought standing here without you would destroy me." She took a breath. "But standing here right now, I realize the saddest part is that I was already alone. I just didn't know it. The man I loved, the man I was walking toward right now, he was a mask. And I was the only one in the room who didn't know the face behind it." Daniel's mother made a sound. A quiet, broken sound. Tears were running freely down Emily's face now. But she was not shaking. She was not broken. She was something else entirely. Something that had walked into this chapel as a bride and was walking out as something harder and more honest and more completely herself. She looked down at her left hand. At the ring that had lived there for 14 months. She slid it off. Came easily, almost like it had been waiting. She reached out and placed it in Daniel's open palm. He didn't close his hand around it. He just stood there, holding it, and something moved across his face that was too complicated to name. Shame and regret, and the specific grief of someone who has just watched the consequences of their own choices arrive. Emily picked up her bouquet. She looked at him one last time. "I hope you find something real," she said. "I genuinely mean that." Then she turned, and she walked back down the aisle. And the chapel, this whole chapel full of people who had come to watch two people begin a life together, began to rise. Not for the groom. Not out of awkwardness or confusion. One by one, and then all at once 300 people stood up for Emily Carter as she walked past them. Someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the sound filled the vaulted ceiling and Emily kept walking, her head up, her veil trailing, her eyes still wet. Her father met her at the doors. He didn't say anything. He just opened his arms. And she walked into them. Behind her, Daniel stood alone at the altar. The ring sat in his open hand. The pews slowly emptied around him, people gathering coats, whispering to each other, glancing back at him with expressions that ranged from pity to cold contempt. His mother touched his arm as she passed. She didn't say anything either. Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go." Daniel looked at the ring for another long moment. Then he closed his hand around it, and the chapel finally fully went quiet. Months later, people who were there that day would still talk about it. Not in the way people talk about weddings gone wrong, with gossip and cruelty and the casual entertainment of someone else's disaster. They talked about it the way you talk about something that changed how you think about things. Something that made you look at your own life a little differently on the drive home. Emily moved into a smaller apartment on the east side of the city. She called London. The position had been filled, but a similar one opened 3 months later, and this time she took it. She is by all accounts doing well. She still cries sometimes, late evenings, When the city is quiet and she lets herself feel the full weight of what she lost. Not Daniel. She knows now that she never really had him. She cries for the version of the future she had planned, for the Sunday mornings she imagined, for the children they had named in whispered conversations at midnight. But she also wakes up every morning in a life that is entirely, honestly, unreservedly hers. And that, she has decided, is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. If this story moved you, if you felt something watching Emily walk back down that aisle, drop it in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what moment hit hardest. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell, because next week's story is the kind that will have you talking about it for days. Every single week, we bring you stories like this one: real human courage, real heartbreak, real moments where someone chooses themselves when everything is telling them not to. You don't want to miss it. We'll see you next week.